John, you are in Vancouver normally, but you are currently in Southern California on vacation. What are you seeing and hearing from people?
Well, it's all most people are talking about. And you know what, honestly, what struck me, Erica, when I drove down here, I didn't know there had been an 8-month drought. I didn't know that last summer was the hottest summer in Los Angeles history. But what I noticed were the hills were bone dry. And I thought, well, this is January, but things look really flammable. And it's, 22, 23 Celsius every day. It's beautiful LA weather, but it's Tinder dry.
You've been warning about Tinder dry situations, hot, dry, windy conditions that set the stage for these out-of-control fires. Does anything surprise you about the fires around LA?
What surprises me is people's surprise. And these are including firefighters. So we all know Southern California is famously flammable. They kind of led the charge in North America on big urban fires in terms of residential damage. And there have been a lot of fires in the area, but these particular areas have not burned in this way with this intensity. And so residents and firefighters are saying, I've never seen anything like this. And, I don't want to say, well, what about Santa Rosa and what about Redding and what about Paradise? But for them, and this is the reality of these kinds of terrible disasters. You can read about it all you want on the news. You can see vivid photos. Nothing compares to having it happen to you. And that is so jarring and shocking and psychically confronting that, you can see why they're surprised. It is the damage is catastrophic.
And John, you've described these vicious fires as a living thing, which makes them so dangerous. Can you elaborate on that idea that fire is alive?
Well, they feed on oxygen, and when the oxygen is moving through space at 100 kilometers an hour, as the Santa Ana winds were driving it the past couple days, it's like a blowtorch or a bellows blowing into a fire, and it superheats everything, and it sends the embers flying in these great kind of blizzard-like barrages. And you cannot fight a fire like that. Though the embers will get into everything. And again, we talked about how dry it was. So that means the ember has no work to do. It can just land on a fuel and it will start smoldering. And with winds like that, it will turn into flame. And what fire wants to do, it's an appetite. Once it needs to keep moving, keep growing. And these kinds of winds and these kinds of fuels, especially on steep hillsides that you find around Los Angeles, are the perfect conditions, very similar to Fort McMurray. And I see so many parallels between these fires.
Right, and that, of course, is what your book Fire Weather zeroed in on, was what happened in Fort Mac back in 2016. It destroyed thousands of homes, displaced many people. Nearly a decade later, you're seeing similarities here in LA.
Absolutely. There are so many of the same conditions, drought conditions, unusual heat. It wasn't quite as windy in Fort McMurray, but the drought and the heat made up for it. And again, people's surprise. I think, just with LA, as LA is, folks in Fort McMurray too are really familiar with big fires, but they couldn't imagine the fire coming into their community as aggressively as it did in 2016. And I think this is how people in Palisades and elsewhere are feeling. And just that shock, and it's almost like a betrayal. What are you doing here? But the other thing, too, is the issues on the hillsides, including the water issues. There were hydrant failures in Fort McMurray, too, because you're pumping water uphill into communities that suddenly need all the water. And they're not built for loads like that, especially when the houses burn down and the water mains break in every single house. And those water mains are still running water at full blast. And so that's how the reservoirs and pumps ran dry in Fort McMurray. And that's, I think, some of the issue here in LA.
You've looked into this. What have you learned about how the very products we're using to build and furnish our houses are part of why fires this size can become so devastating?
There are a couple of human causes, besides anthropogenic CO2 and methane, but where we've chosen to build, which is we're moving back into the forest. We're building our houses very close together on steep hillsides in naturally fire-prone areas, such as Southern California. And the materials that we build homes out of now contain a shocking number of fossil fuel products and other flammable chemicals like laminates and all the glues and plywood and bitboard, particle board that are used to sheathe houses and build cupboards. All that stuff is super flammable when it gets up to temperature. And so what we're seeing is with this heat and with this fire, these homes that are our sanctuaries and we think of as very safe, stable environments actually volatilize much more quickly than you might suppose. And so you have these explosive responses from our homes, and that is very disconcerting.
So interesting. Is there anything then, realistically, John, that we can do at this point to curb these fires in the future?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit to be picked, if you will, around our homes. And Canada is really lucky to have the Fire Smart program. And I don't think it operates in every province, but certainly out west it does. And fire department representatives from fire departments will come to your neighborhood, to your cul-de-sac, to your backyard, and look at how to fire smart your immediate environment. Obviously, metal roofs are better than tar shingle and cedar shingle roofs. Growing pine trees and flammable shrubbery right around your house is probably a bad idea. So there are a number of things that we can do ourselves that don't actually even cost very much money to lower the chances of our houses catching fire, probably by double-digit percentages. That said, when you have a firestorm situation like we had a couple days ago, and we're going to have again here in California, and like we had so tragically in Slave Lake and in Lytton, BC, and up in Fort McMurray, there's nothing you can do after a certain point. But there's a lot you can do up to that point. And so, it's worth it to try.
All right. I will leave it on that note. Thank you, John.
No, you're very welcome, Erica. Take care.